based off the World War I G98, and basically this is just a shortened version. And there's a couple little modifications. The handle is turned down instead of straight out, but other than that, it still operates the same. This is one of the finest bolt-action rifles in the world. It is very reliable, it is very accurate, and the construction on it is extremely solid, and it was copied the world over. I mean, we're talking the Spring C. Now again, this is a standard weapon, and it's a little different than a semi-auto, but in the trained hand, you're going to see that it's really not as different as you would think it is. So, Laden and Seekin, Jaeger? Boyer Fry? He's going to fire 5 rounds.
More about it. Yeah, oh, would you like a card?
Okay, so that's the K98. Now, in the squad, not everybody's going to fire at the same time. They're going to fire tandem. So while one man is rechambering around, another man is firing so that they could cover each other. So we're going to show you that with the Jaeger and Oberschutz with Red Car, they're going to fire in tandem. So Laden and Seekin. All right? Boyer. Okay, that's basically how the squad would cover each other. And the thing is, with the rifle in the German squad, the rifle is there to support the machine gun, not the machine gun to support the rifles like in an American squad. Two different theories, but they both work basically the same in the field. Now the next weapon we're going to talk about, the fighter Beer is holding, this is the G43. This is the German version of the K98 that is a semi-automatic rifle, just like the M1 Garand. Now the difference is with this weapon was copied off of the Russian Tokarov rifle, not an M1 Garand. By the time the Germans designed this, they had not encountered the Americans yet. Now, again, it's a standard 8mm round, just like the K98 rifle used. Difference here is, again, it's semi-automatic, and it's got a 10-round magazine. Now, one of the advantages that this weapon has over the Garand is the fact that A, it's 2 more rounds in the magazine, and B, when this weapon is empty, it doesn't ping. Because how many of you heard the end block pop out of a Garand and it pings? It pings really loud. You can hear that. And the German army actually, when they first encountered the Americans in North Africa, the Americans didn't have a lot of fire discipline yet because they were still very green to combat. So an entire squad would unload at once, and the Germans caught on to that. So they would have somebody basically bait the fire of the Americans, let them all unload, and then attack them while they were all reloading. And it caused the Americans, right around the time of Kasserine, to change their doctrine and say only half the squad fires at one time. Now, again, this weapon will fire as fast as he can pull the trigger. Now, one of the disadvantages to this weapon, to the Garand, is that the gas exchange system in this one is a little more complicated and harder to maintain than what the American Garand has a 98, and we're going to have the fighter Beer fire the weapon. Boyer Fry. One thing to keep in mind with semi-automatic and automatic weapons, when they're firing blanks, they can be temperamental, because in a real weapon firing, real ammo uses that bullet. Okay. It uses that bullet to reset the bolt. In this, we have to use blank firing adapters, so sometimes they get a little tricky. So bear with us. For a fry? Okay, there we go. He got it going. So that's holding the 42 up for everybody to see. Now this is a 28-pound weapon. And again, it's an 8mm. The cartridges for that are interchangeable with the rifle. Generally for the machine gun, they would run a little hotter. So, but in a pinch, they could switch out ammo and it would be fine. Now, this weapon, this is the 42. This is based off the MG34. And one thing about the MG34 is, in both that and this, you look at them, for 1940, this is a very modern-looking weapon. And these are the very first general-purpose machine guns in the world. And one of the reasons why the Germans designed it that way was so that they could beat the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty, which forbade them from having heavy machine guns. This weapon acts as a light, medium, and heavy machine gun, all in one. It all depends on how it is fired. Now, the standard firing is as a light machine gun with 2 men. So you'll have the #1 gunner, and you'll have the #2, who will be the loader. In a heavy position, it would be up on the lafette mount, which is going to increase its range. It's going to use optical sights instead of the iron sights. And it would have more barrels available to it, more ammo, and a larger crew. Now, the weapon here, this one here, this fires 1,200 rounds a minute. Now, does anybody wonder why that fires 1,200 rounds, why it's so fast? Because the standard American .30 caliber is only 500. Most of the Russian weapons were 5 to 550. The reason this is so fast is the Germans realized after their experiences in World War I that the best time for them to train on their target is when it's moving in between cover. So if you're firing 1,200 rounds a minute, that breaks down to 20 rounds a second. So if it takes a soldier 3 seconds to run from that cover to that cover, this gunner can put 60 rounds on him, theoretically. So that's going to greatly enhance the fact that he's going to hit him. Now, the Americans referred to this as Hitler's buzzsaw. And do you know why?
The sound.
Because of the sound, right. Because when this, unlike any other machine gun, when you're firing this, you cannot hear the individual rounds. It sounds like you're ripping a piece of cloth. And the Americans made training films for this, saying, oh, well, its bark is worse than its bite. But the combat troop found out the truth that that is not the case. This thing bites very, very hard. And this is a very deadly weapon. Now, basically, one box of ammunition, we're still told up the box. This is about 250 rounds belted ammunition. And the theory was, is after we fired one of those, we would change the barrel. I'm sure a lot of you have seen in war movies where they say, oh, well, we'll get that machine gun when they change out the barrels. What the gunner would do, #1, when he goes through, he would eject the barrel through here. He would have it would come out. He could grab that barrel out, put a new one in. By the time he's doing that, the #2 had another box of ammunition. He's closing this door. #2 is feeding the feed clip through, the starter tab. It's coming through and they're ready to go. Generally, 4 to 5 seconds. A trained crew is 4 to 5 seconds on this. They're very efficient. And like I said earlier, the Germans, this is the killing arm of the squad. The entire squad revolves around this weapon. So this is crucial. So another way they would use it. Now, generally you've seen earlier when we fired a little advertising, they were laying down firing it. Now they could fire it on the move, where #2 would grab the bipod legs, put them up on his shoulder, and they could fire it from a standing position. #1 could guide him to where he wants to point and train the weapon. And that's basically a last-ditch thing if they're on the move quick. They could fire it standing, or they could fire it kneeling. So they both could kneel. Now, if they were going to fire at an aerial target, like, say, a plane, #2 could stand up, or #1 could stay down and get a higher trajectory on that angle and fire it. Yeah, and, of course, you know, the #2, you notice the #2 here, he's turning his head away from the barrel so that this muzzle blast will bounce off his helmet and come this way, so it won't deafen him, even though it's still going to ring his ears. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead, we're going to deploy this weapon and fire it. And we're going to fire a couple short bursts, then we'll fire a little bit longer one. Now, generally in the field, all machine gun operators fire short bursts because that's, one, it's more controlled. Two, it's easier on the weapon because the longer you pull that trigger, the hotter the weapon gets and the more chance of a malfunction with it. So sustained fire is generally a last-ditch thing, or it's like, well, I really got to hammer this target right now. Okay? Lobbing and seeking. Right, yeah, like I said earlier, this is a blank fire weapon. Blanks don't feed as well as live rounds. They don't reset the bolt as well as live rounds. So if we have a little bit of a hiccup, please bear with us. We'll get it straight. Hopefully we got everything ready to go. MK crew, 4 or 5. Long burst, we'll do a long burst and you can see that. And then a jam. Assistant squad leaders was secondary action. Their first and foremost job was to direct the squad in combat. And they would only fire when they really needed to, or if they wanted to create a little sound diversion so one of their squad elements could move to a different position. So without further ado, Feldwebel Riker, he's going to fire the MP40. And again, it's automatic weapons with temperamental. And that's the